In a world where morality leans on the crutch of imagination and kindness bends under the weight of survival, the kind-hearted person stands holding the sword of good intentions in a battlefield that recognizes only power and glorifies only those whose hands are stained with cunning. The kind ones, those born with the burden of conscience on their shoulders, walk through life believing the world has a heart similar to theirs, that the eternal law governing existence is justice, not self-interest. Yet history, in its cruel jokes, has always laughed at their innocence and applauded their tears, not out of sympathy, but mockery. They are like children trying to convince the beast to devour them because it will feel guilty afterward. In this absurd scene, Niccolò Machiavelli appears not as the devil portrayed in popular imagination, but as an astute physician who understands that kindness alone cannot save, and that survival in this world is not granted but seized. Machiavelli looks at the kind person not with contempt, but with painful compassion, pity for one who refuses a life preserver because its color doesn't match their taste. Machiavelli was never a hater of virtue, but was perhaps one of those who most understood its fragility and sought to fortify it against extinction. He knew that morality in a world of wolves must be a wolf disguised in sheep's clothing, not a lamb reciting peace hymns amid howling. Machiavelli's advice to kind people isn't a call to abandon values but to protect them from naivety. He doesn't ask the kind to become evil, but to understand that evil never sleeps, and that purity which cannot defend itself will be trampled without being mourned. Machiavelli doesn't insult the kind, but addresses them with the call of one who knows. Understand the rules of the game, then decide how you play. He knows that whoever holds the key to power can reshape concepts of good and evil as they please. The kind person says, "I will be honest because honesty is a virtue," and Machiavelli responds, "But do you know the consequences of your honesty? Can you bear the harm when you speak truth in a court full of masks?" The kind person sees the world as it should be, while Machiavelli sees it as it is, knowing that the gap between reality and ideal might swallow those who refuse to acknowledge it. Therefore, he doesn't offer kind people a magic wand but a cracked mirror in which they see themselves defeated, hoping they might stop repeating the same mistake. Machiavelli doesn't write from an ivory tower but from the trenches of politics, from land filled with betrayal, blood, and contradictions. Thus his words, though harsh, spring from practical knowledge rather than theoretical contemplation. He has seen good men crushed under the wheels of ambition and honest women excluded from favor because they believed promises never meant to be kept. He was neither a prophet nor a reformer, but a witness to the absurdity of purity in a polluted world, choosing to teach survivors rather than mourn victims. At the heart of his philosophy hides a bitter question. Is it enough to be virtuous to survive, or does survival require the skill of adaptation, the intelligence of maneuvering, and the harshness of decision? And what happens when the kind person is asked to lie, to deceive, sometimes to wrong others, not because they are evil, but because they want to protect what remains of goodness in a world consumed by greed? This is the dilemma where the kind stand, captivated by an internal conflict tearing at their souls. Can they defend their purity without being stained? Can they build a kingdom of goodness without first passing through the swamps of evil? Machiavelli believes that those who want to make a difference must abandon the illusion of perfection, for perfection in politics is weakness, in war is defeat, and in governance is madness. The kind person who refuses to soil their hands may ultimately find themselves serving the interests of those who don't hesitate to get dirty. Innocence that fails to understand the logic of power becomes a tool in the hands of those who use it to justify their tyranny, while the kind remain prisoners of their bright dreams, oblivious to the shadows creeping behind them. Machiavelli seems to have understood human nature better than people wanted to admit. He knew that people are not led by example but by fear, and that a leader who seeks only to be loved will end up hated, while one who seeks to be feared will at least achieve continuity, not because fear is more beautiful than love, but because it is more sustainable. This is the crux of his philosophy, Don't be cruel without reason, but don't be so kind that you allow people to devour you. The greatest mistake the kind person makes isn't in their kindness itself, but in their belief that the world owes them similar treatment, as if it were a cosmic law that cannot be avoided. Yet Machiavelli, stripped of the illusions of metaphor, reminds us that virtue doesn't protect from betrayal, that good intentions don't exempt from manipulation, and that the road to hell is paved with the intentions of those who don't realize they are complicit with evil when they refuse to see it. The kind expect justice because they are just, and anticipate loyalty because they are honest, but reality doesn't care about our expectations. It slowly strips us bare, revealing the fragility of our souls whenever we try to seek shelter in hope. What makes Machiavelli's logic painful is that he offers no comfort, but demands you shed your moral skin and replace it with bitter wisdom, as if you must learn to smile in the face of one who plants a knife in your back, not to forgive them, but to preempt their stab with a deeper one. The essence of his advice isn't teaching you to betray, but how not to be deceived. When the kind remain faithful to their concept of good without arming themselves with awareness, they become tools in the hands of those who don't hesitate to turn them into martyrs for a cause they don't believe in originally. They are, as Machiavelli says, nothing more than soldiers fighting in the enemy's army, raising the banner of truth while marching in the parade of defeat. We love the kind not because we want to become like them, but because we need them to remind us of what we've lost. But those who love them don't protect them, and those who praise them don't save them. Therefore, their fate remains tragic, as if they were created to be martyrs to morals never destined to survive. This is what makes Machiavelli's advice as painful as it is necessary. It places you before a mirror that doesn't reflect what you want to see, but what you fear to acknowledge. That kindness, if not accompanied by cunning, becomes weakness, and innocence that doesn't understand the world leads to slow self-destruction. When you walk through the corridors of history and contemplate the fates of those who believe that good intentions were enough to change the world, you usually find them forgotten, crucified on the wall of idealism, while the victors write their history with ink made from their blood, not because they were evil, but because they didn't know how to protect themselves from the logic of evil. Machiavelli realized that history doesn't reward the kind, but rewards those who know how to control it. Therefore, he didn't write letters of condolence to the defeated, but instructions for survivors. His fundamental question to kind people wasn't whether they are virtuous, but whether they are ready to understand the logic of the world, a logic that doesn't recognize purity of heart unless it accompanies the intelligence of the mind. Thus, Machiavelli doesn't ask the kind to hide their kindness but to protect it, like embers hidden under ashes so that neither rain nor passing feet extinguish them. He calls for armed virtue, conscious morality, kindness that knows how to become firm when survival requires a measure of harshness. Perhaps what terrifies the kind person in Machiavelli's philosophy isn't just the reality it describes, but the idea of becoming a dual being, kind inside yet lethal in choices, honest in intentions yet expert at hiding them, committed to justice yet mastering the art of injustice when battle requires it. This existential tearing between the desire for purity and the need for survival creates an endless conflict for the kind person. They realize Machiavelli isn't deceiving them, but they fear believing him because believing him means the end of innocence. Thus, the truth that many dare not face is revealed. Kindness, unless conscious, becomes a form of complicity with injustice, and silence about evil doesn't just allow it to expand, but may unconsciously mean participating in strengthening it. Therefore, the kind who don't learn from Machiavelli often become tools in the hands of others, servants to a power they don't understand, and fuel for battles they don't choose. Over time, they transform from subject to object, from human to a cautionary tale, told not for inspiration but for warning. But what does it mean to be both kind and Machiavellian? Can morality arm itself with cunning without losing its meaning? Can conscience collaborate with pragmatism without being polluted? Are we ready to shed the illusion of purity and wear the cloak of doubt? Morality can arm itself with cunning without losing its meaning, provided it understands cunning not as betrayal, but as a tool for survival. Morality that doesn't protect itself becomes a burden. Purity emptied of its ability to change, a poem recited in the presence of executioners. Cunning, in its deepest dimension, isn't the opposite of virtue, but a form of protecting it. Just as the body needs immunity not to betray itself but to preserve it from extinction, morality needs intelligence to survive distortion. A person with conscious morality knows when to pretend to retreat in order to attack, when to be silent to hit the mark, when to step back to protect an idea they cannot afford to lose. Machiavellianism here doesn't call for hypocrisy, but for skill, not for manipulation as an end, but as a means to establish values when they are in danger. Once a person understands that the struggle isn't just between good and evil but between survival and extinction, they must develop morals that fight, not cry. Good intentions that don't position themselves well become surrender, and truth spoken at the wrong moment may cost you the truth itself. Because Machiavelli knows the world isn't ruled by intention but by power, he calls on the kind not to abandon their kindness, but to transform it from an emotional state to a strategic project. Kindness doesn't mean naivety, but the ability to embrace light without denying the existence of shadows, to know how to defend innocence without being stained by naivety. The kind person who holds on to honesty at every moment without understanding its context becomes a false witness to truth because they hand over its keys to its enemies. Seeing this, Machiavelli demands that one be honest in heart, flexible in speech, loyal to their idea but cautious in announcing it, not out of fear, but because every truth has its timing and every virtue its appropriate moment. A word not spoken at the right time can be a sword at the throat of those we love, not a promise of salvation. Thus, Machiavellianism teaches us how to be kind without being killed for our kindness, and how to preserve our principles without offering them as prey on the altar of the world. As for conscience, it isn't polluted by collaborating with pragmatism, but may be realized in it, because conscience isn't measured only by what we desire, but by what we can do within the limits of the possible. Adherence to the absolute in a changing world doesn't indicate purity, but rigidity, doesn't preserve principles, but isolates them from life. A living conscience knows how to preserve the essence of morality when circumstances force it to compromise on appearances. It has the courage to acknowledge that sacrificing a part is sometimes the only way to save the whole. It's not one who clings to form, but one who understands meaning and fights for it with the tools of reality, not with daydreams. In Machiavelli's world, the kind don't turn into evildoers, but into fighters who know that war doesn't mean betrayal, but a means to protect peace. Those who love justice aren't asked to turn a blind eye to evil, but to master how to confront it, how to penetrate the logic of their enemies, how to win without losing themselves. This isn't betrayal of principle, but intense loyalty to it, because a principle that doesn't stand in the battlefield isn't a principle but a soft illusion. Machiavelli, in presenting this vision, doesn't strip kind people of their humanity, but gives them one last chance to preserve it, because he knows that morality isn't served by helplessness, and naivety isn't a virtue, but a crime against everything pure. If this content is making sense to you, click the like button and subscribe to the channel. Thank you for your support. When we contemplate this complex structure, we discover that Machiavelli doesn't destroy morality, but rebuilds it on more solid foundations. He doesn't call on the kind person to become a liar, but to understand how truth is used as a weapon in the hands of those who don't believe in it. He doesn't ask them to oppress, but to know when justice becomes a means of domination, and when silence is more eloquent than speech. He draws them a map for survival, not for deviation, but he demands they bear the cost of knowledge, the cost of seeing the world as it is, not as they wish, the cost of keeping their heart pure while their fingers pass through the mud if circumstances force them to. Thus, kindness becomes a rationalized project, not a passing emotional state. It becomes a strategic plan, not merely an emotional reaction. In the hands of those who have learned from Machiavelli, it becomes a new kind of power, soft, silent, hidden, but undefeated. It is virtue that doesn't stand at palace doors asking permission, but storms them with wisdom and knows when to withdraw, when to wave peace, and when to hide to prepare for another round. Thus, Machiavelli is no longer an adversary of kindness, but its secret advocate, one who understood its fragility and sought to fortify it, not through poems nor sermons, but through reality with all its cruelty and contradictions. The kind person, in light of his teachings, isn't asked to contradict themselves, but to know themselves better, to descend from the heights of ideals, to walk on land covered with the traps of history, surrounded by ropes of self-interest, crowded with masks that reveal nothing of the truth. Those who refuse this descent will not escape falling, not because they are bad, but because they weren't ready to see the world as it is, only as they wanted it to be. Machiavelli doesn't guide us to evil but to awareness of it. He doesn't glorify it but exposes its tools, strips it bare before us so we can choose for ourselves the form of purity we can bear. He doesn't write for traitors but for those who fear betrayal and don't know how to protect themselves from it. He doesn't seek to remove the hearts of the kind but to strengthen their arms, so those hearts aren't crushed under the feet of those who know only the logic of power. He doesn't extinguish the light of innocence but teaches it how to hide its ray when light becomes dangerous, and how to return to shine when the time for ascension comes. In the end, kindness isn't against Machiavellianism, but its goal, a goal achieved not by purity alone, but by cunning, not surviving through abstract honesty, but through insight, not living by emotion, but by wisdom that knows how to manage emotions without betraying them. The kind in Machiavelli's time don't choose between being virtuous or surviving, but learn that true virtue, that which changes the world or protects what remains of it, knows how to live within the fabric of reality, not outside it. It doesn't fear contradiction or flee from relative pollution, but walks amid the wreckage to rescue what beauty can be saved. For the battle today isn't just between good and evil, but between awareness and naivety, between those who know the price and are prepared to pay it, and those who continue to dream of a purity they cannot afford. And at the end of every line, Machiavelli doesn't offer ready-made commandments, but leaves you with an inevitable choice. Either understand the game and master its tools, or remain silent in the back rows of history, singing of virtue that no one sees as you pay its price alone. This vision may not be satisfying to everyone with a warm heart, but it's necessary for anyone who wants to preserve that warmth in a merciless world. In times of soft savagery, the question is no longer, am I kind? But am I kind enough to survive without abandoning myself? Here the story doesn't end, but begins anew in the mind of every kind person who has read Machiavelli, with eyes that want to understand, not judge, with eyes that have decided to remain kind, but not as before,